Hi, I'm here to talk to you this week about annotated bibliographies. So, annotated bibliographies, some of you may have done before, but it's important to pay attention and make sure that you're following through with the rules in the way that I'll be grading them. So, the first thing to note is that you need to have 5 sources, and maybe the most important thing to remember is that your interview and your survey cannot be one of those 5 sources. Those are primary sources. Primary sources are sources that you create yourself and have not been published. You need 5 secondary sources. So 2 of those sources can be the ones that you use from your literature review. And you'll be able to use some of the information from your lit review just to copy and paste in here for your annotated bib, so it gets you ahead as well. But if you're not going to use it in your paper, do not include that as one of your 5 sources. You can include documentaries, you can include websites. For say your group has a website, they're a sorority and you go use the sorority's website for some information for your paper, you can use that for your actual paper. The reason we do this in particular, and you'll see the requirements for the annotated bibliography listed, the reason we put this together is so that you don't spend your time thinking, oh, this is going to be a great source, and then it comes time for the paper and you can't use it. So first thing you'll do is find 5 different items. You'll look for periodicals, you could look for documentaries, you could look for websites, you could look for books, you can look for newspaper articles that you think are going to be helpful. Certain things like blogs can be useful if it's going to have plenty of information in there. You'll have to examine them and kind of look through and see what they include, and then you're going to cite it in APA. Some of you keep forgetting to include the year in the citation, and I want you to understand for the final ethnography, if you leave the year out of the citations for your paper, it's 25 out of 100 points. So it's really a huge takeaway lesson you want to have from here. So make sure you're citing the year. So you'll cite it in APA style. And the reason we do this is so that you don't have to redo it when it's time to post your reference page for your paper. You may add other sources after this, but you'll already have it done. And everything I do in this class is meant to scaffold so that you're getting work done for your final paper a little at a time. So make sure you alphabetize the annotated bibliography so everything's in the right order, so that when it's time to turn it into a reference page, you will turn in both the annotated bibliography for the paper, and you'll turn it in once where I can give you feedback, and then you'll turn it in a second time, excuse me, with your paper. And it's worth points both times. So it's worth Moodle points the first time, and it's worth 5 points of your final ethnography paper the second time. That way too, if I give you feedback and you did poorly on it or worse than you wanted to do, you can make those changes before you turn it in. Then you'll write a short annotation that summarizes basically what is this about, this particular. We've been working on summaries a lot. And then you go ahead and discuss multiple things throughout that is listed where it says what to include in an annotation. So you'll have to explain what the scope of the work is, and you'll have to use a brief description of the work's format and content. And then you're going to want to discuss the author's intellectual and academic credentials. So like we did for the literature review, when you talked about the author's credentials, were they a PhD, were they a doctor, do they do research in this particular area, you're going to do the same for this piece of work. You're going to want to go through and talk about their credentials, look it up. If you can't find it by clicking on their name or looking at the bottom of the entire list, you're going to want to Google who they are. And so you can type up their information and look for their credentials. If you struggle with it, give me a call or email and we'll start working through that so I can help you. You want to look and make sure that if the person is subjective, so maybe if they don't have the right credentials to be an authority on this, that you do discuss it. So you're, like I said in the rubric, if it's a blog you're using or one person's documentary that they did or a student ethnography from something else, might not be the most accurate information because it hasn't been checked by a peer group. You're going to discuss who the audience was written for. So if it was in an article in the Psychology Today, if it was in the Journal of Medicine, was it written for parents? Was it written for people that are in the group already? Who is the audience meant for? And it generally says something like that um, in the abstract and when they're talking about it. You want to talk about if there's any shortcomings in the work that you're using, what might need to be considered, or if there's a certain bias, like they said, oh, this particular group is the greatest and they didn't talk about the other side of it. If there's any significant special features in there, sometimes they have a discography or they have an extra portion, like a appendix at the end that's helpful. And then most important, and what I'll be looking for, and this is how I grade the annotated bib, I look through the what to include in an annotation and make sure that you have it cited, that you include how are you going to use this in your paper. So it's forcing you to think ahead what your topics are going to be writing about. So like I said, if I'm studying roller derby, I'm studying a roller derby team, what was it I wanted to know about them? Do I want to know about sexuality? That might have been a question I had. Is it a gender issue that we need to discuss that might be interesting to me? Safety, how often do they get hurt? Do they get a lot of injuries? How do they get involved in this? How did they hear about roller derby? I might look at the history of roller derby. Those would all be different topics I might include about roller derby that I'm looking into, and certain things about the group in particular that I picked up from watching them. Maybe their uniforms, maybe that's something that I find fascinating and I want to know how do they choose the uniforms and the names. Those will be my topics. And so I'm going to want a source that supports that topic. So if I looked up uniforms and names, how do roller derby people pick their team names, that's what the source I would include. And I'd say this is how I'm going to use this to support me in this particular topic. Remember, again, we are not proving a hypothesis, we are testing it. So things you're trying to find out, it's okay if what you thought was incorrect. As you saw in Iowa 80 and in Denny's, A Study of Nightlife, they both had things that they found out about their subgroup that they had to disconfirm their beliefs. So that's perfectly okay. So I gave you examples of how to write an annotated bibliography. It's on the second page of the document. But please, if you have questions, email me. I've been getting a lot of good emails from people and having Zoom meetings with people to straighten things out. So anything you have questions with, I'm here to answer it. And I just want to make sure that you do get the best, learn the best during these trying times that you can. So best of luck.